The camera flashes hurt my eyes as Vincent pulled me closer at the charity gala. My hands shook slightly from what I now know was withdrawal, but back then I thought it was just nerves. He squeezed my waist and whispered in my ear, "Smile, Sophie. You're living proof that love conquers everything." The crowd applauded as we posed for another photo. My stomach felt sick, but I forced a bright smile. Behind his perfect grin, I could feel something cold and calculating. The golden chain around my neck suddenly felt like it was choking me. The ballroom spun slightly as I gripped his arm tighter, fighting the dizziness that had become my constant companion. I watched wealthy donors write checks for millions, believing they were saving lives. If only they knew the truth about where their money really went. Vincent's charity foundation was his masterpiece of deception, and I was his unwitting accomplice. Every smile I gave, every grateful speech I delivered, helped him steal from the very people we claimed to help. The irony wasn't lost on me. The pills that made me compliant were funded by money meant for other sick people. 3 hours later, sitting in our black sedan, I finally found the courage to say the words that had been stuck in my throat for months. "Vincent, I want a divorce." He didn't even look surprised. He just took a slow sip of his expensive whiskey and stared out the window. Then he turned to me with that same calm smile he wore at board meetings. "Of course, darling. But remember, your mother still owes me $300,000. If you leave me, I'll have to collect that debt immediately." My blood turned to ice. He pulled out his phone and showed me the signed loan documents with my mother's shaky signature. "She's 72, Sophie. Where do you think she'll get that kind of money?" His voice was so casual, like he was discussing the weather. I realized then that this conversation wasn't spontaneous. He'd been prepared for this moment. The loan papers were too organized, too accessible. He'd probably been carrying them around, waiting for the day I tried to leave. That night, I sat in our marble bathroom staring at the bottle of pills he'd given me for my anxiety. The label had my name on it, but I'd never seen this doctor. As I held the bottle with trembling hands, the truth hit me like a freight train. My rich husband had turned me into a drug addict, and now he was using my mother's medical debt to keep me trapped. The pills rattled as my hands shook. I was a prisoner in a golden cage, and he held all the keys. I counted the remaining pills, only 5 left. When had I become someone who needed medication just to get through the day? I used to solve complex financial problems for a living, but now I couldn't even remember what I'd eaten for breakfast. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger. Hollow cheeks, glassy eyes, expensive clothes hanging loose on my shrinking frame. Vincent had slowly erased the person I used to be, replacing her with this medicated shadow. I wondered how many other women were sitting in similar bathrooms, holding similar bottles, feeling equally trapped. 2 years ago, I was completely different. I worked as a financial analyst at a small investment firm downtown. I loved numbers, spreadsheets, and finding patterns others missed. My mother had raised me alone after Dad left, working double shifts as a hospital cleaner. We lived in a tiny apartment, but we were happy. I was proud of my work, proud of my independence. I drove a beat-up Honda and cooked dinner every Sunday for Mom. Life was simple but good. I had no idea how quickly everything could change. I specialized in fraud detection, ironically enough. My colleagues respected my ability to spot irregularities in financial statements. I'd helped expose several small embezzlement schemes and felt good about my work. My biggest accomplishment was uncovering a nursing home administrator who was stealing from elderly residents. The satisfaction of protecting vulnerable people gave my life meaning. I dated occasionally but never seriously. I was focused on building my career and taking care of Mom. We had our Friday night movie traditions and weekend farmers market trips. Looking back, those simple moments were the happiest of my life. Vincent Romano appeared in my life like a knight in shining armor. He was everything I thought I wanted: successful, charming, and generous. When my mother was diagnosed with cancer, I was drowning in medical bills. That's when Vincent stepped in. He paid for her surgery, the best doctors, everything. He said he believed in helping families stay together. I thought I'd found my soulmate. Looking back, I realized I'd actually found my captor. He'd been studying me for weeks, learning my weaknesses before making his move. Vincent owned a chain of private hospitals, and ran a medical research foundation. He seemed genuinely passionate about helping cancer patients, sharing stories of families he'd helped. He knew exactly what to say to someone watching their mother slowly dying. He'd researched my background thoroughly, knew about my father leaving, my mother's struggles, my student loans. His first gift wasn't jewelry or flowers, but paying off my mom's initial medical bills. I cried with relief and gratitude. He held me while I sobbed, whispering that he'd never let anything happen to my family. That's when I should have run. When someone offers to solve all your problems, they usually plan to become your biggest one. The first pill came 3 months after we married. You seem stressed about the wedding planning, he said, handing me a small white tablet. This will help you relax. It's completely safe. I asked my personal doctor. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, and he only wanted what was best for me. The pill made everything feel soft and distant. When I asked for the bottle to read the label, he laughed. Don't worry about that medical jargon, sweetheart. Just take them when you need them. The pills appeared whenever I seemed upset or questioned anything. Worried about mom's recovery? Take a pill. Confused about our joint bank account? Take a pill. Missing my old job? Take a pill. Vincent always had the perfect explanation for why I needed them. The stress of my new lifestyle, adjusting to married life, concern for mom's health. He made it sound so reasonable, so caring. I didn't realize that each pill made me a little less myself. My sharp analytical mind became foggy and compliant. Questions that used to come naturally to me seemed too difficult to ask. I stopped reading financial news, stopped caring about current events. My world shrank to whatever Vincent told me was important. Slowly, he began isolating me from everyone I loved. He convinced me to quit my job because a woman of my status shouldn't work. He installed tracking apps on my phone for my safety. My credit cards were canceled and replaced with joint accounts to simplify our finances. When I wanted to visit friends, he always had a reason why I shouldn't go. They're jealous of what we have, he'd say. They don't understand our lifestyle. Before I knew it, months had passed since I'd spoken to anyone from my old life. My old colleagues stopped calling after I missed too many coffee dates. My college friends got tired of canceled plans and rain checks. Vincent always had somewhere important we needed to be instead. A charity function, a business dinner, a weekend trip to his lake house. He filled my calendar so completely that there was no room for anyone else. When my best friend Tracy tried to visit, Vincent was polite but cold. After she left, he explained how uncomfortable her questions about my medication had made him. She doesn't understand what you've been through, he said. Maybe it's better to focus on people who support your healing. Gradually, Tracy's calls became less frequent, then stopped altogether. One afternoon, I was looking for aspirin in his office when I overheard him on a conference call. The foundation audit is next month, someone said. What about the missing funds? Vincent laughed coldly. Don't worry. My wife signs whatever documents I put in front of her. She's too medicated to ask questions. My heart stopped. He was using my signature for something illegal. I quietly backed out of the room, my mind racing. The pills had made me compliant, but underneath the fog, my analytical brain was still working. I remembered signing papers that Vincent said were routine charity documentation. I'd trusted him so completely that I never read them carefully. My signature was probably all over fraudulent documents, making me complicit in whatever scheme he was running. The worst part was how he'd laughed about my medicated state, like I was some kind of trained animal performing tricks. I spent the rest of the day pretending everything was normal, while my mind raced with possibilities. How many documents had I signed? What kind of liability did I have? Was I already an unwitting accomplice to federal crimes? That night, I started paying closer attention to every paper Vincent put in front of me. That night, I locked myself in the guest bathroom and made a decision that probably saved my life. I flushed every pill he'd given me down the toilet. The next 3 days were hell. I sweated, shook, and threw up constantly. Vincent thought I had the flu and brought me soup, playing the concerned husband perfectly. But I was actually detoxing from whatever he'd been feeding me. By day 4, my head was clearer than it had been in months. I could think again, really think. The withdrawal symptoms were terrifying. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold a glass of water. I had vivid nightmares and cold sweats that soaked through multiple sets of pajamas. Vincent kept offering to call his doctor, but I refused, claiming I wanted to fight off the flu naturally. He seemed almost disappointed that I wasn't asking for medication. I realized he'd been controlling my mental state for months, keeping me just foggy enough to be manageable. The scariest part was recognizing how dependent I'd become on those pills to feel normal. Without them, every emotion felt raw and overwhelming. But for the first time in months, I could think clearly enough to recognize the danger I was in. With my mind finally clear, I started investigating. Vincent kept all his important papers in a safe behind a painting in his study. I'd watched him open it hundreds of times, memorizing the combination. Inside, I found documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing money flowing from his charity foundation into personal accounts. Forged medical reports. And worst of all, a life insurance policy on me worth $2 million, taken out just 6 months ago. He wasn't just stealing from his charity. He was planning something much worse. The insurance policy was dated just 2 months after my heaviest medication period, when I was barely functional. The beneficiary was Vincent, naturally, but there were also provisions for accidental death that paid double. I found medical reports claiming I had a history of depression and anxiety that could justify self-harm. None of it was true, but Vincent had built a paper trail that would support any story he wanted to tell. There were also records of him researching drug interactions and overdose symptoms. My blood turned to ice as I realized he'd been planning my death, probably making it look like suicide or accidental overdose. The charity fraud was bad enough, but this was attempted murder. I knew I needed evidence, but I had to be smart about it. I bought a tiny camera disguised as a pen and a small recording device. Every day while he was at work, I photographed documents and recorded conversations through his office door. I learned he was laundering money through fake medical research grants. Millions of dollars meant for cancer patients were going into his personal accounts. My mother's medical bills had been paid with stolen money from other sick people. The recordings revealed the full scope of his operation. He had fake researchers on payroll, shell companies that existed only on paper, and bribes paid to government officials who approved grant applications. The foundation claimed to be funding cancer research, but the studies didn't exist. The labs he cited were empty buildings with fake addresses. He'd stolen over $8 million in just 2 years, money that should have gone to real research that could save lives. The irony was devastating. My mother's life had been saved with money stolen from other cancer patients who might die because of his greed. Every time I listened to those recordings, I felt sicker. Vincent wasn't just a thief or an abuser. He was directly responsible for people dying from diseases that could have been cured with properly funded research. I needed help, but I couldn't trust anyone in our social circle. Then I remembered Professor Williams from college, my old economics teacher who now worked for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I called him from a payphone downtown, explaining everything in whispers. "Sophie," he said quietly, "if you're right about this, your husband is running one of the biggest charity frauds I've ever heard of. But we need solid evidence. Can you get me financial records?" I told him I was already working on it. Professor Williams explained that charity fraud was a federal crime, but they needed ironclad evidence to build a case. He warned me about the danger I was in, especially after I mentioned the life insurance policy. "Sophie, if he's planning to kill you, we need to move fast," he said. "But we also need to make sure the evidence is admissible in court. Any lawyer worth his salt will claim you were too medicated to be a reliable witness." He connected me with a federal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime. They developed a strategy to gather evidence while keeping me safe. The hardest part was continuing to act normal, while knowing Vincent was planning my death. Every kiss, every "I love you," every concerned look when he offered me pills, all of it was part of an elaborate plan to murder me. Playing the perfect wife became my full-time job. I attended his business dinners, smiled at his colleagues, and even pretended to take my pills when he watched. I became an actress, performing the role of the devoted, slightly scattered wife. Every fake smile helped me gather more information. Every loving gesture toward him was actually building my case. He thought he was so clever, but I was turning his own game against him. The hunter had become the hunted. I perfected the art of hiding pills under my tongue and spitting them out later. Vincent never suspected because I maintained the same foggy behavior he expected. I stumbled over words occasionally, forgot simple things, and acted confused by basic concepts. Meanwhile, I was recording every conversation, photographing every document, and building a case that would destroy him. The hardest part was acting loving toward someone I now knew was planning to kill me. When he kissed my forehead goodnight, I wanted to scream. When he brought me breakfast in bed, I had to fight not to throw it in his face. But I knew that maintaining my cover was the only way to gather enough evidence to stop him. Every day I didn't expose him, more donation money disappeared and more cancer patients went without proper treatment. Professor Williams connected me with Detective Rodriguez from the Economic Crimes Division. We met in secret at a coffee shop across town. I showed him photographs of the forged documents and played recordings of Vincent discussing the money transfers. "This is incredible work," he said. "We've been investigating his foundation for months, but we couldn't get inside information. You've given us everything we need." We planned carefully. They would raid his office and freeze the accounts, but first I had to get out safely. Detective Rodriguez was amazed by the scope of Vincent's fraud and the sophistication of his money laundering scheme. He explained that most charity fraudsters steal thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Vincent had stolen millions and created an elaborate network of fake companies and research projects. The detective was particularly concerned about the life insurance policy and Vincent's research into drug overdoses. "This goes way beyond financial fraud," he said. "Your husband is planning murder, and we need to treat this as a potential homicide investigation." They assigned undercover agents to watch our house and monitor Vincent's movements. The plan was to let him proceed with the gala while gathering final evidence, then arrest him publicly to maximize the impact and ensure other victims came forward. Vincent was planning a huge fundraising gala to celebrate the foundation's success. He was so proud, showing me the guest list full of wealthy donors and city officials. He had no idea that several FBI agents would be attending as undercover guests. "This will be our biggest night ever," he told me, kissing my forehead. "After this, we'll be set for life." I smiled and nodded, knowing it would indeed be our biggest night, just not in the way he expected. The gala was Vincent's ultimate con game. He'd invited potential donors from across the country, planning to raise another $2 million in a single night. The irony was that he'd scheduled it for the same week he planned to kill me, probably figuring that my accidental death would generate even more sympathy donations. He'd already written a speech about how grief-stricken he was, and how the foundation would continue my legacy of helping cancer patients. Detective Rodriguez showed me copies of Vincent's computer searches. He'd been researching recent widow fundraising campaigns to see how much money grieving husbands typically raised. The coldness of his calculations was breathtaking. Even my death was just another business opportunity to him. I realized that the gala wasn't just about money. It was about establishing his reputation as a grieving widower before he collected on my life insurance policy. One evening, I was copying files when I heard his car in the driveway earlier than expected. I barely had time to close the safe and sit down with a magazine before he walked in. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" he asked, studying my face carefully. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Just reading," I said, holding up the magazine with shaking hands. He stared at me for what felt like hours, then smiled. "You look pale. Maybe you should take your medicine." I nodded and pretended to swallow the pill he handed me. That night was the closest I came to being discovered. Vincent seemed suspicious, asking random questions about my day and watching my responses carefully. I realized he'd been tracking my movements more closely than I thought. He mentioned seeing my car at unusual locations, and I had to quickly invent stories about grocery shopping and doctor's appointments. The stress of maintaining my cover was becoming overwhelming. I was constantly terrified of making a mistake that would expose my investigation. Vincent's questions became more probing over the following days. He asked about my sleeping patterns, my appetite, whether I was having any strange thoughts. I realized he might be planning to accelerate his timeline. Detective Rodriguez later confirmed that Vincent had been researching suicide prevention websites and depression warning signs, probably building a story about my declining mental health to justify my upcoming suicide. The call from my mother broke my heart. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Sophie, Vincent's lawyer came to see me today. He said if you divorce him, I have to pay back all the medical bills immediately. I don't have that kind of money. I'll lose the house." That's when I realized his cruelty had no limits. He wasn't just holding me prisoner. He was using my mother as insurance. But instead of breaking me, it made me stronger. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for her too. Mom explained that Vincent's lawyer had shown her loan documents she'd signed while heavily medicated during her cancer treatment. She barely remembered signing anything, but her signature was clearly visible on papers that made her personally responsible for over $300,000 in medical expenses. The lawyer had been polite but firm. If I filed for divorce, the loan would be called in immediately. Mom's house, her only asset, would be seized to pay the debt. I realized this was probably Vincent's backup plan in case I tried to leave before he could kill me. He'd made sure that even if I escaped, my mother would suffer the consequences. This gave me even more motivation to see him arrested and prosecuted. I wanted him to face justice not just for stealing from cancer patients, but for terrorizing elderly victims like my mom. 2 weeks before the gala, everything was in place. The FBI had warrants ready. Detective Rodriguez had agents positioned throughout the city. Professor Williams was monitoring the foundation's bank accounts, ready to freeze them the moment we gave the signal. I had copies of every important document hidden in a safety deposit box downtown. Vincent had no idea that his perfect plan was about to become his perfect downfall. I just had to survive 2 more weeks of pretending to be his loving, drugged wife. The final phase was the most dangerous. Vincent seemed increasingly anxious, probably because he was approaching his planned murder date. He'd been asking me strange questions about my life insurance beneficiaries, and whether I'd updated my will since we married. He also kept offering me new medications for stress and insomnia, clearly trying to get more drugs into my system. I had to be extra careful about hiding the pills and maintaining my performance. Detective Rodriguez had equipped me with a panic button and assigned round-the-clock surveillance, but I knew that if Vincent decided to act early, help might not arrive in time. The irony was that I'd never felt more alive or focused, even while pretending to be heavily medicated. My analytical skills were sharper than ever as I helped build the case that would destroy my husband. The night before the gala, Vincent opened a bottle of champagne to celebrate. "Tomorrow everyone will see how amazing you are," he said, raising his glass. "You're going to give a speech about how the foundation saved your family." He had written my speech, of course, a touching story about gratitude and love. I clinked my glass against his and smiled. "Yes," I said softly. "Tomorrow everyone will finally see the truth." He had no idea how right I was. The speech Vincent had written was a masterpiece of manipulation. It talked about my gratitude for his generosity, my mother's miraculous recovery, and my commitment to helping other families facing cancer. There were carefully placed references to my ongoing struggles with anxiety and depression, probably laying groundwork for my upcoming suicide. The speech was designed to make the audience love both of us, ensuring maximum donations and sympathy. I'd memorized every word, but I had no intention of delivering it. Instead, I'd prepared my own speech, one that would expose every detail of his fraud and my own captivity. Detective Rodriguez had helped me structure it for maximum impact, ensuring that everything I said would be legally admissible and impossible for Vincent's lawyers to dismiss. Tomorrow night, instead of playing the grateful wife, I would become his prosecutor. The ballroom was packed with hundreds of guests. Cameras flashed as Vincent introduced me as the inspiration behind our foundation's mission. I walked to the podium in a beautiful dress he'd chosen, looking every inch the grateful wife. The crowd applauded politely, expecting another boring charity speech. Instead, I pulled out a small remote control and pressed a button. The screens around the room lit up with bank statements, forged documents, and recorded conversations. Vincent's smile froze on his face as gasps echoed through the ballroom. The lighting system I'd had Detective Rodriguez's tech team install worked perfectly. Every screen in the room displayed the evidence simultaneously. There was no way Vincent could stop what was happening. I watched as donors' faces changed from polite interest to shock and horror. The mayor, who had been sitting at Vincent's table, stood up so quickly he knocked over his chair. City council members began whispering urgently to their assistants. Vincent tried to maintain his composure, but I could see panic creeping into his eyes. He started moving toward me, probably planning to physically stop my presentation, but undercover FBI agents blocked his path. The room erupted in confused chatter as people tried to process what they were seeing on the screens. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and clear, "I want to show you where your donations really went." The screens displayed evidence of millions of dollars being stolen from cancer patients and children's hospitals. Vincent tried to grab the microphone from me, but FBI agents were already moving through the crowd. "She's sick," he shouted desperately. "She's been on medication. She doesn't know what she's saying." But the evidence was undeniable. His perfect reputation crumbled in real time as cameras captured every moment. I continued speaking as chaos erupted around us. "For 2 years, my husband has been drugging me to keep me compliant while he stole from your donations. The cancer research you thought you were funding doesn't exist. The patients you thought you were helping never received treatment." My voice grew stronger with each word. Vincent's attempts to discredit me were falling flat as the evidence spoke for itself. Bank records don't lie. Forged signatures are obvious when compared to real ones. The fake research proposals were so poorly written that any scientist in the room could spot the errors. Several donors were already on their phones, probably calling their lawyers or the police. The local news crews that Vincent had invited to film his triumph were now documenting his downfall instead. Within minutes, Detective Rodriguez was placing handcuffs on Vincent's wrists. His face had gone from tanned and confident to pale and sweaty. All around us, his wealthy friends and business partners were backing away, pretending they'd never met him. "You have no idea what you've done," he hissed at me as they led him toward the exit. "Your mother will be homeless by morning." I looked him straight in the eye and smiled. "Actually, Vincent, you have no idea what I've done. But you're about to find out." The crowd parted as the FBI led Vincent through the ballroom. Some people were filming with their phones. Others were already leaving to distance themselves from the scandal. I remained at the podium, answering questions from reporters, and explaining how other victims could come forward. The foundation's board members were huddled in a corner, probably calling emergency meetings and lawyers. Vincent's assistant was crying, claiming she had no idea about the fraud. Several major donors approached me to ask how they could help with the investigation. The most satisfying moment was watching Vincent's lawyer arrive just in time to see his client being loaded into a police car. Even his high-priced legal team couldn't spin their way out of this much evidence. The next morning, federal agents raided Vincent's office and froze all his accounts. The foundation's assets were seized to compensate the victims of his fraud. Vincent was denied bail and sent to county jail to await trial. When his lawyer tried to collect my mother's debt, they discovered that every penny had been paid back to the original medical providers from the seized foundation money. His final weapon against me had been dismantled. For the first time in 2 years, I could breathe freely. The media coverage was overwhelming. Every major news outlet wanted interviews about the charity wife, who exposed her husband's fraud. I was careful to focus on the victims rather than myself, encouraging other families to come forward if they'd been deceived by Vincent's foundation. Within a week, dozens of victims contacted the FBI with similar stories. Some had been promised treatment that never materialized. Others had discovered that research grants supposedly funding their children's rare disease studies had been fake. The ripple effects of Vincent's fraud were worse than anyone had imagined. I testified before a grand jury, providing details about his money laundering operation and his plan to kill me. The prosecutors were confident they could convict him on multiple federal charges that would put him away for decades. I used my knowledge of financial fraud to start a consulting business helping other abuse survivors understand their legal and financial options. The FBI hired me as a consultant on white-collar crime cases. My mother sold her house and moved into a beautiful condo, paid for legally this time. Reporters called me the whistleblower wife, but I preferred to think of myself as simply awake. I'd been asleep in a nightmare, but now I was living in reality again. My consulting work became deeply meaningful. I helped women recognize the warning signs of financial abuse and coercive control. Many of my clients had stories similar to mine. Partners who controlled their money, isolated them from support systems, and used medication or substances to maintain control. I worked with lawyers to help victims navigate complex financial situations where their abusers had hidden assets or created fake debts. The FBI cases were equally rewarding. My experience as both a financial analyst and a fraud victim gave me unique insights into how white-collar criminals operated. I could spot patterns that other investigators missed and understand the psychological tactics used to manipulate victims. Professor Williams became my mentor again, teaching me advanced investigation techniques. My mother recovered fully from her cancer and became one of my biggest supporters, often speaking at events about how families could protect themselves from financial predators. Today, when I speak to women who think they're too broken or too trapped to escape, I tell them my story. I explain how someone can use love as a weapon and how money can become chains. But I also tell them that the same intelligence that made them targets can become their greatest strength. Vincent tried to erase who I was, but instead he reminded me exactly what I was capable of. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my power, and my future. Vincent was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and attempted murder. The life insurance policy was the key evidence that convinced the jury he'd planned to kill me. His foundation's remaining assets were distributed to legitimate cancer research organizations, funding real studies that might actually save lives. I kept one photo from our wedding day, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of how completely someone can fool you when you're not paying attention. The woman in that photo looks happy but hollow, medicated and compliant. She's a stranger to me now. The woman I am today is sharper, stronger, and more aware than I ever was before Vincent. I tell my clients that surviving abuse doesn't just mean getting out alive. It means reclaiming every part of yourself that your abuser tried to destroy. Vincent thought he was breaking me down to rebuild me as his perfect victim. Instead, he broke down my illusions and rebuilt my determination. In trying to make me weak, he made me unstoppable.